All right, so this is our fifth attempt recording this. It's been about 2 hours. Hopefully it goes smooth this time, but this is how to play Scrabble. Scrabble is a board game that's very, very popular. Almost everyone has heard of it. The primary objective is to build as many words as you can. So it essentially tests your vocabulary skills. Now, we are playing online, but typically Scrabble is played physically with an actual board. You can often see people playing in public places, right? You might see a bunch of people with Scrabble board down and playing, sort of something that you can just jump into right away. And so we'll talk about how to play it here. In Scrabble, each player is given a wooden plaque. Here's our wooden plaque here. And they're given 7 letters, okay? And so each player places a word on the board on their turn, okay? And words must connect to other words already on the board, horizontally or vertically. Each letter has a number that shows its point value. Your score is based on the point value of each letter on your word, multiplied by the premium squares on the board, right? So your premium squares are your colored squares. The orange squares are triple word score. The red squares are double word score, meaning if a letter is touching any of those squares, the entire score for that letter is doubled. The entire score for that word is doubled. So you sum up all the letters, right? You sum up the score for all the letters, and then you double it. If you're touching a triple letter score or double letter score square, the letter that is touching it has its score doubled. And finally, if you're touching both a letter score modifier and a word score modifier, you first apply the letter score modifier and then you apply the word score modifier. Scrabble has placed this in their rules to maximize the points you can get, and it's how Scrabble has been played ever since. Now, on your first turn, whoever's first turn it is, you drag a word to the center of the board. You always begin on the center star. Sometimes this is marked with a star, it might be marked with something else. In either case, it's a red square because the center square is a double word score square. Now, you can play words that are 2 letters or more. I do believe the only letter that is one word is the letter I. So unfortunately you can't play. But other than that, every other word is valid. No abbreviations, so can't really think of one off the top of my head. But no names as well, right? So just simple standard words. Your word can read vertically or horizontally. So let us start. We'll start by playing a word in the center of the board. It will read both horizontally and vertically. It can read horizontally or vertically. So I'm going to play Ash, and we are going to highlight a number of rules here. So notice how I placed Ash there vertically. I could have also placed Ash horizontally. And so both are valid placements here. Typically turns are also timed in Scrabble here, but we won't worry about that. But notice how both are valid placements. And so we've gone over the placements, right? We know that we have to start off in the middle. And I explained the scoring previously. And so now let's apply our knowledge about the scoring to assess the score we will receive here. So this red square, as you can see by the red glow, this is a double word score square. Meaning if a letter is touching it, the word that is formed will be scored double. So you'll multiply by 2. So let's score the word. 1 for A, 1 for S, 1 for 4 for H. That is 1 plus 1 plus 4. That's 6. Multiply by 2 because it's a double word score square, and we score 12. So if we play this, so we played Ash, and you can see we scored 12 points there. And so now everybody is just playing like they normally would. Now, I don't think okay, so tamely actually is a word. So that is a smart play by Toothy there. And Toothy scored twice. So this brings me to my next point here. Okay. Now, if letters in your word touch other letters, each other letter that is being touched must also form a word. So notice how Toothy placed tamely here on this Y, right? Then Toothy also scored for Ashy, right? So initially I placed Ash, A-S-H, but when Toothy placed tamely, not only did they score T-A-M-E-L-Y, but since Ashy is also a word, they scored for Ashy as well, right? So if letters in your word touch other letters in adjacent rows or columns, every letter must be part of a complete word. In this case, every letter here, every letter that is touching two rows or columns is part of a complete word, right? Y here is touching a row and a column, and it's part of a word in both. So this is a valid sequence. Now, in the off chance that you form a word like this, and the letter you're touching, or let's say you form a word, and one of your letters is touching another sequence of letters, such that it is not a word, then unfortunately that is an invalid move. So let me see if I can find a way to demonstrate this, right? But once again, just to reiterate, Toothy scored for both tamely and ashy because simply it's touching two words, right? So you score for both of them. Note that Toothy, so one more thing before we go back to my original point. Toothy scored a double word score here because Toothy was touching a red square here, but Toothy did not score a double word score here. And you might be saying, why? There's a red square under this A, right? We know that from the beginning. But you can only score a premium square once, and that is when it is first played upon by the player who places the letter onto it. Okay, so since I already placed a letter, in this case A, I already scored for that double word score square. So when Toothy was scoring the word ashy, she did not consider that in her scoring. Okay, now do note that once again she scored for both. And so we've covered pretty much everything. The only thing left now is to cover what I was talking about regarding the adjacent rows and the adjacent columns. Okay, now let's say I choose to make a word here. If I had another S, that would be nice. Fortunately, I don't. Okay, so we're going to make a word here actually. This won't demonstrate what I was saying, but excuse me for my mouse usage. But we will simply score it just to sort of get a bit more gameplay going. I think lashy might be a word too. And I know that. Okay. Okay, this is perfect. This is perfect. This is, we'll actually. So this is what I meant to emphasize here. And pardon me for my poor mouse usage. So we have two more rules left to cover, and or to demonstrate actually. So I mentioned how if letters in your word touch other letters in adjacent rows or columns, that too must also be part of a word, right? So here, we're going to form the word neon, right? Like the neon lights you see. So what's going on here? If letters in your word touch letters in another word, that must also be a word, right? So remember that phrase. In this case, O is touching letters in another word. It is touching the B and the A. And we know that that must also be a word. In this case, we have BOA. And to my knowledge, I do not believe that is a word. And so in this case, while neon is a legal word, one of the letters in our word of neon, in this case the O, is touching other adjacent letters. And every adjacent letter it touches must also form a word with those adjacent letters it touches. In this case, it does not form a word with those adjacent letters it touches. So while we do form a valid initial word here in neon, since our O is touching the B and the A, and that is not a valid word, this is not a legal move, right? So once again, to reiterate, if letters in your word touch other letters, then that too must also form a word. So if I try to play this, notice how I can't actually play, right? This is grayed out. I can't play that, and why is that? That's not a real word, okay? So that basically highlights my point here about the adjacent letters. So now notice how I can play, right? It's adjacent letters. This is the number one rule in Scrabble that people always mess up, right? If you have adjacent letters touching other letters, and I've reiterated this probably 50, 60 times now, but it must be a word, right? In other words, all instances of letters on the board, a letter must form a word with all of the other letters it touches. It's as simple as that. That's the simplest way to put it. It must horizontally and vertically form a word with all other letters it touches. So we've covered every single rule except for one. And the last rule I want to cover is the one regarding blanks. And so just for the sake, and we'll also cover the exchange and pass rule. So just for the sake of demonstrating, so we actually will also cover the concept of exchanging and passing. And so let's say you have tiles that you are not too fond of, okay? Then you can exchange them, right? But you'll have to pass your turn to do so. So you pass your turn, you place these tiles in the bag, you draw out new tiles from the bag, and then you put these tiles back in the bag, the ones you would like to exchange. If you can't make a word, or you choose not to make a move at the moment, but you want to keep your tiles, you can simply pass without exchanging. In this case, we'll exchange, so and pass rather than just pass, right? So to exchange your tiles, you must pass this turn. So I can exchange as many as I'd like. There's no limit. And what's happening is I'm actually reaching into the bag here, and I'm grabbing 7 new tiles. I could have chosen to pass and keep those tiles, but I chose not to. Now, why did I exchange all 7? Now, that was to maximize my chances of getting a blank, because this is the last rule to demonstrate before we finish this video. So, I have a blank here. A blank is special in that a blank can be used to create any letter or any word. Sorry, you can create any word with the blank by picking any letter you would like from the alphabet, right? And so this is very powerful in that it can help you create words in situations where you're missing a letter. And so a common strategy is to save blanks for when you absolutely need to use them. And notice how I can pick any letter for them. Now, obviously, if you're in a real physical environment with the actual game board, the letter won't magically show up on your blank piece, right? In this case, since we're online, it's marking it with the letter we'd like. But notice how this Z here that I just picked, it doesn't have a number on it. That is because blanks cannot be scored for. They can help you make words, but the letters themselves that were originally blanks, they have no value. You can't score for them. That's just how it is in Scrabble. And so just to demonstrate here, if let me just take this blank back. So this is our last demonstration before we end the video. So let's say I made this t for the word at, right? AT. Now, normally t has a value of 1 and a has a value of 1. So normally I'd score 2. But in this case, I'm only going to score 1 point for the a because this. So in this case, my score for the at, as we can see here, only changed by 1 point. Right, if we see in the top left here, I was originally at 12, and now I'm at 13. So that essentially wraps up how to play Scrabble. I've gone through the rules here. Unfortunately, I will not do a gameplay demo just because I feel like it is sort of simple to sort of understand just by what Mooey and Toothy, the two robots here, were doing, but also simply because unfortunately I have spent a lot of time recording this and it has not worked, and so unfortunately I do not simply have the time to do a gameplay demonstration. But I feel like that is a pretty good grasp of how to play. I think there was enough basic knowledge here to sort of get the gist of it. So that wraps up how to play Scrabble. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.